Hello viewers, well it's my blog now for the Malaysian Grand Prix 2013. Malaysian Grand Prix, 15 years we've been running at this racetrack now. It seems funny, it still seems like a reasonably new track. You know, many years ago we were seeing it, the new wider Herman Tilke circuits. It was one that I didn't necessarily enjoy initially, and the racing at the time, it was such a dominant track for Ferrari, it was never all that much fun. Watching the race today then, we've got a field of cars that on paper are very close. Very exciting. We've got the Lotus back in the field. We've got the resurgence of Mclaren with the strong Red Bull and the quick starting Ferraris at the front, along with the surprise packages such as Force India, which have done really well so far this year, and of course Mercedes, good in qualifying, punching above their weight and improving all the time. It's good to see them getting into the mix. So let's talk a bit about the race today. I suppose that if you said to me, what's the start going to be like? I'd say, well, the Ferraris are going to launch off the line. They're going to be, up there, and with Vettel around the first couple of corners, there's going to be action. And there was action, obviously a great getaway for Fernando Alonso, getting up behind Sebastian Vettel. A fantastic start for Mark Webber for a change. That was really nice for him. And the field all made it round reasonably safely. All reasonably safely, except for Fernando Alonso. Now, when we look at Fernando, his front wing got knocked under the front wheel that was dragging along the ground. From his driving perspective, it's unlikely that he will have known the severity of the damage. I've seen people driving around with broken front wings before and they hang on for ages, but obviously this one was touching the ground and under the maximum load of 200 mile per hour, pressure on the front. What happened was inevitable. So it's a surprise he didn't go into the pits, but I think really that a driver, when it's out of their eyesight, they rely a lot on the team to direct the driver. You have to come in, that part is going to fail. And I think for Ferrari today, they just let themselves down. I think they were trying to hang on a couple of laps, put some slick tyres on him and not lose too much time. And I think in the end, it was a bad call from them. So an interesting start. Cars stopping by lap 6. Again, the intermediates wore out pretty quickly. We had lots of drama today, though, and I'm going to move swiftly on to the key aspects of the day. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton stopping at the Mclaren garage. It was quite funny. Watching the onboard at the time, I could see Lewis was going to pull in there. Just seeing the McLaren boys coming out. He's looking at his wheel without even thinking about it. He's pulled into the McLaren garage and then he's been moved on. You've got to laugh at a situation like that. I always find it quite entertaining. It's not the first time someone's done it. Obviously, Jensen's done it before and other drivers in the past. It can happen from time to time. Same with, I've seen drivers pulling up at the wrong part on the racetrack at the start of the race and everything else. So we had the pit lane incident as well between the Toro Rosso of Jean-Eric Vergne, Charles Pic in the Caterham coming together. Of course, there's going to be a fine there as well for Toro Rosso. Silly business, really. I don't know what they were thinking, letting him straight out into the path of another car. And then after that, we really kind of settled down into the race. We had Webber, followed by Vettel, followed by Hamilton and Rosberg, and then Jenson Button in 5th place, who was being dropped at one point. Let's talk about McLaren for a second. They've improved a lot in the last week. This track was obviously better for their car. But obviously, with the pit stop problem for Jenson later in the race, that ruined any chance they have, which was a real shame because the race really would have come back to the McLaren in the end. So I think the potential there of a podium was very high for them, and I can see why Jenson is so disappointed today. On to the main drama of the day. I think that obviously both Force India's out. That was a shame for them as well. But it was an unhappy end to the race, wasn't it? Let's talk about a couple of the elements now. Webber and Vettel, drama, multi-21 is the word on everybody's lips tonight. These are two very different instances, looking at Mercedes and the Red Bull that was going on here. We had Red Bull where Mark Webber's come out the pits after his final stop. He's had a battle with Sebastian. Mark Webber's going to hold the lead. Mark Webber's got good pace in the car. Sebastian Vettel was hitting the limiter, so couldn't get past him on the straight. Fine. You know what? We can rinse it right to the end and we can possibly take each other out and burn our tyres up and burn our fuel up, and Mark will defend like anything, or we don't race and we agree to hold station and just take this. A nice comfortable 1-2 victory. clearly that message went out to Mark, it went out to Sebastian, and Sebastian decided to ignore it and go for it. And of course, changing his engine mapping, it meant his top speed wasn't as high, which meant it gave an opportunity to Sebastian to get past. That isn't racing. I've seen people saying online, "Oh, Mark Webber's moaning. This is racing." No, it's not racing. They weren't racing. Webber was following whatever the orders of the team were. So there was no racing going on there. Sebastian took that upon himself, and it's raised some really interesting questions. What do you do? What do you do about Sebastian? You know, he's in the car. He's a racing driver. He's a winner. All he can think about is winning. That's what he's there to do. He's there to utterly rinse that car and get it first. He's there because he loves statistics. He loves, counting those numbers and being the best. How do you control that? I think this has raised a really interesting element. What would you do to Sebastian if you were in Red Bull right now, having a discussion, having a meeting? What would you say to Sebastian? And what would you say to Mark to trust the team again? Because it has to be said, there is a serious break in trust now. If the team come on the radio to Mark next time when he's leading a race and say, "Slow down, Mark, Seb won't pass you," can you believe them? Is there any trust? What's to stop Seb doing it again and saying, "I'm sorry, but I'm going to pocket the 25 points and the win along the way"? I think it's raised an interesting element. So I'd be interested to know what you would do, viewers, on that, because there is only so much you can do, even with contractual obligations, when you don't want to damage your own chances in the World Championship. Mark Webber appeared very dejected today, and what did Mark Webber's face say to me? Mark Webber's face said to me, if I'm to be controversial, he said to me, "I'm going to retire tomorrow." Honestly, that's the way it looked. If Mark Webber suddenly said in China, "This is my last race," or "I'm not going to race again," it wouldn't surprise me. He won't win the championship this year if the team don't do something about it now. But, at the end of the day, there's no fair battle there. There needs to be fairness. Even if a win is handed back, I think that Seb hasn't done himself any good here. And I think there's a real rift that needs to be improved between those two. A friend of mine said to me, bet he called Michael Schumacher after the race, and they had a chat, and Michael talked about some of the things he did. A lot of us have talked about Michael Schumacher in the past, and I remember seeing the Sky Show at Christmas, and they said one less championship, a few less race wins, and we'd think nothing less of him, but we'd see him as one of the greatest. But those moments dirty his career. They put a stain on it in history. And I think there's just moments in time, such as Michael Schumacher winning in Austria when Rubens pulled over that time. And he thought he didn't need Rubens to do that. He had a massive lead in the championship, and it was awkward, and it was sad for the sport and sad for Michael Schumacher. It let him down. It let down, the driver can't win, at the end of the day. And it's moments like that. And I noticed on the BBC today that DC was kind of brushing over, we all make mistakes. Yes, we do, but there are mistakes that stay with us in history. And I think this is one that Seb will need to learn from. He's still young, many more championships ahead of him. Let's see if he can move on from this. Let's talk about Mercedes now. Mercedes, obviously, solid run. Lewis and Nico. Now, this is a different situation. Hamilton had rinsed out his tyres and his fuel because he'd been pushing very hard in the race. Rosberg clearly hadn't used the same amount of fuel and tyres. And I say that because there was constant warnings to Hamilton about fuel. There was no warnings to Rosberg about fuel. He was very comfortable on how much fuel he had in the car. So he clearly had a much faster car. In terms of racing, they were never really going to be allowed to race to the end. And I think in that situation, if they had been allowed to race, as I say, if we go back to Webber and Vettel, if Webber and Vettel had been allowed to race, it's highly likely that Vettel couldn't get past Webber. He didn't quite have any more in the car than Webber. Had Rosberg and Hamilton been able to race, the likelihood is Hamilton had nothing to fight back with because he was low on fuel. So that's my observation of what I saw there today, and it appeared obviously Rosberg was very unhappy about it. So ultimately on the podium we had three very unhappy drivers. We had Mr. Multi-21 Sebastian Vettel, followed by obviously an unhappy, very, very unhappy Mark Webber, followed by a reasonably unhappy, but at the same time relieved Lewis Hamilton. no doubt Lewis has a contract with Mercedes that says he has to get a certain amount of podiums this year and a certain amount of points. Otherwise, he has that option of leaving the team. So Mercedes do have to follow that. But let's hope we don't see too much of that in the future. And so it's laid up a lot of drama today. Team orders, I've got no problem with team orders. I think team orders are important for the team. I can see the point of bringing both cars home in a particular order, but I think sometimes when that gets in the way of the obvious driver of the day, as we've seen a few times, then it gets awkward. And we've seen it before with Ferrari, we've seen it today with Red Bull, Mercedes in different ways. The big loser today, obviously, Mark Webber. That was his race. He was way ahead and came off the power, and as I say, the rest is going to be history now, and no doubt there's going to be lots of discussion over it for the next 3 weeks. So that's it for my Malaysia blog. As ever, it's been good fun, lots of drama. Overall, the race wasn't an overly exciting race. The field spread was high. Let's see how that concertina works in other tracks. It does appear to be that all the different cars have a different window of tyres working properly, and you're going to get some cars up there some days and some cars up there other days. So it's going to be interesting. And also a mention to Kimi Raikkonen's three place grid penalty for blocking Nico. I don't agree with that. I thought it was a bit harsh, it has to be said. If you saw the circumstances of it, there wasn't really much Kimi could do at the time. It was a very quick moment, couple of linking corners, so he was a bit unlucky and obviously had a very difficult day as well. So I stuck to the key points on this rather than going through all the different drivers in the field today. But it's going to be an interesting few weeks now, a lot of controversy and discussion, and we're going to arrive in China and then we'll see what everybody's capable of. Have McLaren come back into the mix? Are Ferrari going to be strong? Lots of questions, more to look forward on that, and as ever, I'll be back soon.